I've got that up, and I've got a kind of flow chart up here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So batch processing, for those of you that are familiar with Staff Suite and or Tempware, is going to be very, very similar, other than the navigation and how to get there. For those of you that aren't, this is really what it looks like. And what we'll do is go through this chart briefly, and then, like last time, we'll flip it over to Stacy and actually have her walk through these steps so you can see them. So the first step would be to add a batch, right? So there's any number of ways that a batch can get added, and we'll talk about that. One, I can just go to the batch area and create it. Second way, there might be functions that automatically create a batch in the background, like the web portal time entry. Or if I'm doing time import, I can have it create a batch for me, etc. And we'll look at some of those ways. Once I have a batch, I can then have transactions. So the batch is really just kind of a bucket, right? It's a kind of a descriptive, what is this batch, what does it contain, there may be some dates around it, it's tied to a corporation, and then it can contain transactions. So those transactions can be any number of things: time cards, direct hire billing, AR payments, AR adjustments, so on and so forth. All of those types of transactions start with a batch. So we really have to have batches and transactions in them before we can have any other financial transactions such as checks or invoices. I have to start with one of these financial transactions. So once I have the batch, in the case of time card, I have multiple entry methods. One, I can just key in a time card by itself. Two, I can use what we call a group time card, where I can kind of mass key time cards in via like a spreadsheet view that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. We can also import time. We can have time in come via the web, and we can even add a time card right directly from the assignment. So today we'll look at a number of those. I don't know that we'll get into everything like time import today, but we'll look at several of these methods. Once I have a batch added, and I'm comfortable with the contents and I'm ready to move forward, I can proof that batch. Now I can proof a batches one at a time, or I can proof multiple batches at once, and we'll talk about why you might want to do that a little bit later. And really, proofing doesn't alter anything about the time card. It goes through and looks at associations and the data associated to the time card to look for things that might be missing or incorrect, to give what we call diagnostics. And those are warning messages. Hey, this time card doesn't have any pay or doesn't have any bill. Well, that might be on purpose or it might not. So it's just a warning. It gives the user a chance to run those diagnostics reports and run reports like the proof post register that shows totals. So I can look and see, okay, I'm expecting 1,000 hours this week. I can run my report and see, do I have those 1,000 hours in all of my batches or batch that I've proofed? And from that point, a proof hasn't really done anything. I can make changes. So if there was something missing or I forgot a time card or a rate was wrong, I can edit that time card or edit the associated records, and then I can reproof. And I can do that as many times as I want to. Okay? And then when I'm ready, I can post. So these concepts apply, again, not just to time cards, but to all the different transactions. Every single one I have to proof, and then I can post. And when I post, those transactions are then locked into place, and there are some other things that happen during the proof process that we'll talk about. The bottom line is I have to have a posted time card before I can have a check or an invoice. Okay, so all of those stitches, again, we're building on everything. Everything we did last time allows us to have a batch, which allows us to have a time card, which allows us to have a check and an invoice. And then once I have an invoice, I can have an AR payment, so on and so forth. So we'll kind of continue building off of this. And I'll put this on the SharePoint site that I sent out as well if any of you would like to have this. This is something we provide to customers during training. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. All right, so Stacy, I will make you the presenter.
Okay.
Now, I think our site got upgraded to 3.6 last night, which is exciting, but also we'll see how that goes today. what I'd like us to start with is just creating a batch and then putting time cards into it. All right. So if I want to go manually create a batch, what we need to do is go to the Financials menu at the top of your screen and go to Financial Processing. This is really where we initiate most of the financial functions on the system, which is not surprising given the title. And then the first item in your list is batch. So if you're new to the back office, and we see this with internal folks as well as customers, you come into this, and what do I see? I see a batch search results area. What is this? This is showing me existing batches in the system based on criteria that I have in my search or filter area. So right above that grid, you can see I've got selections that say batch time card and batch status available for entry. Input within is blank. So really what that's telling me is show me time card batches that are available for entry that were added today. So if we want to change that filter, hit that search button. And typically what we'd want to do is maybe add a time card or an input within a certain number of days, because if you leave that blank, it's going to assume 0 days. So maybe let's just put 7 days in there and see if anything comes back. So it does always require a batch type, but other than that, that's it. So now we can see there is a time card batch that was entered several days ago, and it's available for entry. We'll talk about the different statuses as we move forward with the batches as well, but that is the initial status. So if we want to add a new batch, okay, I've seen the batches that are in there, whatever, I'm coming in to put a new batch to put time cards in. What you can do is scroll to the bottom of this page. Now you see that Add button. So, you know, typically with ADAPT, we like to keep people on their toes. Sometimes there's a button on the bottom, sometimes there's a menu on the right, sometimes it's both. So in this case, there's a button at the bottom. So let's hit that Add button. So now it's asking us the batch type. So let's click that selector. So here we see the different types of batch transactions that we can put in. So over the course of these training sessions, we should touch on most, if not all of these. But in this case, what we want to select is time card. So let's double-click on that or select it and hit OK and hit Next. So it has to ask us this first so that it knows what type of information to display on the resulting screen, because different batch types might have different fields associated with them. Now, the next time I go to add a batch, it's going to remember the type that I put in. So next time I say add, time card will default in there, and I can change it if I want to. So let's skip right to corporation, and let's pick a corporation from the drop-down. Now, I know you created a corp last time, but let's use our training corp because we have a lot of assignments tied to that, whereas we really don't with your new corporation. Right. Batch branch. Get a lot of questions about this. So batch branch, and you can choose the training branch here, is really just an organizational tool for the most part. So I can choose a batch branch of training branch, but within it I can have time cards really of any branch that I have access to. There's no restriction on that. So if you have a payroll department where they just, you know, they get time cards from all these different branches, they could just put them all in one batch. They don't have to create a batch for each branch. Now, we give that capability to someone so that they can organize their batches and see them and, you know, process and filter by them, but it's really not restrictive. It's kind of organizational.
So that's not a required field?
It is required, but it doesn't restrict someone from putting time cards of a different branch in there.
Okay.
Kind of wish it wasn't required. But then again, there may be some implication on branch access. So if someone comes to the batch area, they could only see, you know what I mean? So you just kind of work around it. Once people understand what it means, they can deal with it. Work period. So this is where we would pick the most recent, or you know, in this case, let's say the most recent work period ending date. So most folks are Monday to Sunday or Sunday to Saturday or whatever. So let's just pick the most recent Sunday Very good. And then it'll populate the from date. Again, this is a default. So when I go to put time cards into this batch, it's going to default that work period. But if I have a one-off that's different, I don't have to create a separate batch for it. I can put time cards from different work periods in the same batch. That's just default behavior. Now you'll get a diagnostic that says, hey, you've got time cards from a different work period, just in case someone screwed something up, but it's not restrictive. Now on the batch name at the top, it does not require that. So if we leave that blank, what it will do is just put in an ID number. I think it's just the reference number of the batch in the database. It'll just be a string of numbers. But if you choose to, you could put in a batch name, and that's alphanumeric. I don't think it wants spaces or dashes or anything like that. But a lot of people use this, so they'll put the branch and the work period or something, some combination of like that, and they'll use that to help find their batches in the system. So that's a heavily used field, because when we go and look in the database, what we'll see is there's a batch reference and then a batch name in the batch table, and they might be the same if someone left that blank, or they could be different. There's a field below that says default standard hours. That's a checkbox. So on an assignment, I can put in what we would call standard hours. So typically this person, they're working 40 hours a week every week. I can put that on the assignment. So then when I went to add their time card, as soon as I found that assignment, it would auto-populate 40 hours into the time card for me, and then I could change that if I needed to. Now let's go ahead and hit save. And now I think what I mentioned is you can't have spaces or characters in your batch name, so you could just, exactly, there you go. So this has now taken us to the batch summary screen. So I'm looking at the batch. I'm no longer in the main batch area. I'm within this batch. And we can see that the initial status is available for entry. That means the batch has not been proofed or posted. I can go and put time cards into this batch from any number of methods, single, group, or import. I can get time cards in here. So what I'd like us to do then is start with the single method. So let's go to the upper right and say add single transaction. Now most clients don't use this widespread. If they have a bunch of time cards to enter, they're going to use group or web or import, but they might use single for one-off, something like that, or a late time card. And really the reason we're starting with this is so we can get a really good understanding of what a time card looks like, the components that are on it, and then we'll look at the other kind of mass entry methods. So what we can see is here is the kind of initial time card entry screen. Now what do I do on this? How do I begin to enter this? Now traditionally in systems, if someone is, if you think back to I guess what we would call the old days where you didn't have things like group time card entry, you would have a report, what we call a payroll board report. It would have a listing of all the assignments that you were expecting time for. And then you would have a printout of that, had all the assignment IDs on it, and you would go through and on that report write the hours. So you'd have a report that had an assignment ID and their hours, and so you could come in here and key the assignment ID, key the hours, confirm the next, key the assignment. And some people may still do that if they're coming from one of our older products. So in this case, Stacy, unless you wrote one down, I don't know an assignment ID. And what's nice in here is I don't have to. So what you can do is instead go to employee name, and you can actually just do a lookup. So if you know of an employee that you've been working with, Stacy, you could type in their first name. Otherwise, you can type, I think, Joe. There's several Joes in here. And then just click Tab, hit Tab on your keyboard, and that will then perform a lookup. So it's showing us we've got a couple of Joes here. I think you could probably pick either one of those. And then it will show us the assignment, and if someone has multiple assignments that they're active on for that week, it will have us pick one of those and hit confirm. So at this point, it's going to then, it might take a second, populate assignment, all this kind of information onto the time card. So if I knew the assignment number, I'd just key it, tab, and it would flow in. I wouldn't have to do Joe and then the assignment, confirm. So that's why people used to use that method before we had the group transaction that we'll look at in a little while. Now, you notice it's taken you right to the total hours field. And in this case, maybe just do like 45 hours. So just type 45 and then tab out of that field. And what we can see down there then in the grid is it's auto-populated regular and overtime for us. So instead of having to go down in the grid and key in regular and then key in overtime using the controls, we can just do 45.
And does it have it broken down because this person already has pay for this time frame?
No, because they went over. Oh, I see what you're saying. Because why is it 17.5 regular
Right.
and 20
Instead of 40 and 5.
That's exactly right. So when I tabbed out of that 45, it probably queried and looked to see, does this employee have any hours already for the work period ending date? And then it moved as much as it could into regular and put the rest to overtime. So that's a good question. Now, you'll notice right below the total hours field, there's a field that says exempt. What does that mean? It means that would mean they're overtime exempt. It would be nice if that label said OT exempt. So what that means is on the assignment, actually on the order which flows to the assignment, which flows to the time card, they're exempt from overtime. So if I did 45 hours, it would just put it all in regular. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Then we have the period end. So again, that came from the branch, and I could change that. And we still haven't figured out how to get the calendar icon to appear on the screen 4 years later. Anyway, in IE. But then we have the check handling, which flows from the employee and the assignment. And then there's several flags to the right of that as well, and I want you to notice these. The first one I want to point out is direct deposit. So we'll notice that box is not checked. What that means is Joe does not have at least one active direct deposit account. Okay? If he did, that box would be checked automatically.
Got it.
So if I wanted to pay him via direct deposit, well, I'll just check that box, right? Well, no, because I can check the box all I want, but if he doesn't have a direct deposit account, what will happen is the direct deposit payroll process will uncheck that flag and give me a diagnostic. So it's very important that people pay attention to that. Now, there's a few other flags on here: individual check, individual invoice, bill only. The individual check people get a little bit confused with that. Some people seem to think that, oh, that means he'll get a paper check. You know, say he has direct deposit and I want him to get a paper check. No, individual check means that, let's say he had multiple time cards for the work period. So let's say he had one time card with his regular hours, and then I put another time card in that was like for a bonus. Well, typically that's going to lump them onto one check or direct deposit device. If I said, you know what, I want his bonus check to spit out separately, I could flag that time card with individual check, and then it would spit that out onto a different check for him. Same thing on the individual invoice. You know, on a billing profile, you might have it set to group time cards together. So no, I want this time card to be on its own invoice regardless of how I have my billing profile set up. And then finally, bill only means I don't want this time card to be picked up by the payroll process. That's all that means. So the payroll process will ignore it, but it will still get picked up by the billing process. Any questions about those?
No.
Okay. Now, in that grid down there, the pay bill code grid where you have regular, overtime, you can continue and add additional pay bill codes. So right under regular and overtime, if you just click into that next cell, yep, you can click on the drop down, and then here are all the different pay bill codes. So we might go back if we have time and look at pay bill code setup and talk through that, but it's relatively straightforward. You can also put expenses. They have a separate expense area. So what that looks at in the pay bill code setup, there's a type that's called expense. So those will show up here. So you could do, why don't we do, let's see, why don't we do just another pay bill code? So why don't we go up to the top and do like a holiday or bonus or something like that. Yeah, exactly. So and then maybe it's, let's say it's a pay only. We're not going to bill the client. So what we would do is put a 0 in the bill hours. We don't want to leave it blank. And actually, I don't know that it'll let us save it. So you see where I have bill hours, you put a 0 in the bill hours. So you've got a 0 in the rate, but the bill hours where you've left it blank, put a 0 in there. Now also you can put a note. So you notice in that grid there's a field that says invoice message. So for holiday it won't matter because that won't show on an invoice because there's no bill. But overtime, let's say that, hey, this guy has a lot of overtime this week, so we want to put approved by John Doe or something like that, so that they don't freak out, hey, we got approval on this overtime. And what will happen is that will appear on the invoice right next to that pay bill code. So not necessarily even on the invoice, you can get very specific there. All right, scrolling down, you do have a benefit program, so that would be if you're going to pay out like sick time or holiday time or something like that. We'll talk more about that probably in a later session. Time card notes, you can have multiple messages. So you have the message that we saw next to the pay bill code. You also have a time card note field where that will kind of, it's a grouping of the time card. So you might have regular overtime holiday. Then once it gets to the end of the time card, it would print those notes on the invoice. So I always put something in there, just put note from time card just so we can see where that prints. Okay. Now we talked a little bit last time, with deductions, we set up recurring deduction. This would be a one-time, right? So we've got a deduction for like equipment. That's a good example, right? So an employee is going to work somewhere. He needs to have gloves. He doesn't have any. So here's some gloves, and we'll just deduct, $10 from your paycheck. It's just one time. That's it. I don't have to go through the process of setting it up on the employee and then ending it and all that good stuff. We also see now some other fields on the screen. So we have a time card status right below the time card notes there that says unapproved. So the whole approval side of this, it really exists for the web portal time, right? So the proofing and posting process don't necessarily care if a time card is approved or not. And in fact, when you post, it will automatically approve them. But that's for people that capture time and have clients approve on the web to be able to differentiate those that have been approved versus those that have not. And then finally, it allows us to see the resident versus the work location on here as well. Any questions, Stacy or anyone else, on this individual time card entry?
No.
Okay. So you have two options here. Well, I guess three, really. We could hit confirm. That would just save the time card. Confirm the next would save us and then just leave us on the screen to enter the next one. Approve would save it and change that status from unapproved to approved. Now, once you approve a time card, you cannot edit it. So it's locked into place because the idea with that is the clients potentially approve those hours, and if we need something changed, we need to send that back to the client. So if you approve a time card, the only way you could modify it is to either then go back and reject it or just to delete it and start over. So it's somewhat similar to posting in that I can't modify it, but an approved time card, I can still reject it or delete it, whereas once a time card's posted, it's kind of there for all time. All right, let's hit confirm then. So what would happen then is we would get, if we had left zeros or anything like that, it would prompt us to, hey, you have, you left something blank on here. Are you sure? Like if we put a blank row, it would give us some warning messages. All right. And for whatever reason, it didn't refresh your screen. So let's click on the left and just click where it says Batch Summary. And that should refresh our screen. So now we can see that the batch status is still available for entry, but our transaction count is now 1. So that's single entry. People don't necessarily use that for mass entry, but even if they're modifying a time card, which we'll see in a bit, they have to become familiar with how that screen works. There's a lot to it. All right, so now what I wanted us to do is look at the Add Group Transaction feature on the right. So let's click that. And what I mentioned previously is, there's the concept of and it might take a second for this to pop up, so no worries there. It was the concept of a payroll board report. So someone would run and say, show me time, assignments that were active last week. They would print it out, they would write the time on it, and then they would key it. This is really designed to be a replacement for that payroll board report. Now, we still have people that we deploy a report that does that, but this functionality is designed to show those assignments that we're expecting time for last week. So what we see across the top are three key pieces of information. The first is the pay frequency, weekly. The second is the work period ending date, 10/23, and the third is the corporation. So what I want you to do is click that Apply Filter button and just wait. Now, the only thing that's about this screen is you click Apply Filter. Well, is anything happening? Actually, yes. It's running the query in the background. It just doesn't. We don't have a spinny or anything like that to tell us. So what it's doing right now is querying the database to find any assignments where the pay frequency is weekly. It was active during that work period for that corporation where there is not time already. And there's actually two pieces to this. So there's the time card entry grid, but then if you scroll to the bottom, you notice there's a time cards entered. So we can see that Joe already has that one time card, right? So there that time card is. Now here are all the assignments that are still expecting time. So the way this works is like if you click into that cell where it says Joshua Anderson, click into the total hours field. It's like the second row down. And then you can just key the hours. So you can do 40 or 45 or 30 and then hit enter and go to the next one. So it's like a spreadsheet. And it just goes through. And again, if you were to put more than 40, it would flow that into overtime. So now you can see it goes from regular and overtime and so on and so forth. So let's go through and key time for several of these people. Tom Cruise sure has a lot of assignments. Now, that's probably enough for now. I want you to pick someone, let's say Eric or Jennifer or Tom, any of those, and scroll over to your right. So you notice we have some things that we can do over here. So we already saw how it could do regular and overtime. You would have the ability to do one additional pay bill code. So that's actually just a grid where you can click into the cell and then pick, oh, I also need to pay him double time or a bonus or whatever that might be. And then you would key in the hours and the rate. So in this case, it's going to assume both pay and bill.
On this, if it's like a bonus and it's not tied to any hours, would we still have to put an hour unit there?
Yep. So if it's a units based, you would end up just doing one at
okay.
$100 or whatever that might be. And in the pay bill code setup, you can define whether it's units based or hours based. So bill rate, if it's pay only, you could do 0 or whatever. And then benefit program, that's where you could tie this to, I'm paying him sick pay, I need to back it out of his sick program or whatever. You could do that here. But again, we'll cover that in more detail in a different session.
Adam?
Yes?
This is similar to TurboTime.
That's right.
And
very
exactly
similar.
like it. Exactly like
it is.
Yes.
Now with TurboTime, does it give you, I can't remember, does it give you the ability to add those additional pay bill codes, or is it just regular, double, triple?
I don't think so. I don't
Gotcha.
think so. No.
Now, inevitably, what has happened, Mike, is hey, you can add this pay bill code on here. Well, I want to be able to add 2 or 3.
Exactly.
It's just never enough. So,
Exactly.
the thought process is, well, how much scrolling do you want someone to have to do? So if we gave for every pay bill code that we could have someone enter, you have to have 6 columns.
Exactly.
So if we want to have someone be able to enter 2 pay bill codes on here, we'd have to have 6 additional columns for someone to scroll through on here. So again, this is designed for quick entry. If you've got someone that needs like 6 pay bill codes on a time card, well, you might consider individual entry or import or something like that. It's just, this is meant to be, I need to bang out the hours for kind of my regular people.
Yep.
Any other questions?
It's too bad that, for instance, like the people listed, is there a way to put in 40 hours for the top person and then like copy all the other people at 40 hours, like instead of just entering in each one? Kind of like a copy-paste 40 hours into all of them. Nice.
Yeah, I don't
That would be really fast.
the way to do that. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could Control-C, Control-V
Yeah,
a bunch of times, but I don't know if that would save you much beyond just keying 40 and hitting enter.
exactly. No, I was just wondering if there was some type of function like that.
Now we have. Yep, I understand.
Mm-hmm. So.
Now we have a few buttons right above the grid. So you've got confirm and exit. So go ahead and click the confirm button. What that would do is write those time cards in for the ones we've entered and move them to that bottom area and then allow me to continue on. Whereas confirm and exit would save them and then exit the screen. And then exit would just discard whatever I did. So it might take a second. I've entered quite a few time cards. So it's writing those into the database, and then it will eventually move them. The only thing that kind of gets people in trouble in here is, again, there's no kind of signal to the end user that the application is doing anything. The buttons don't gray out. I don't get a spinny. So maybe I'll just hit confirm like 10 times. Maybe I'll hit apply filter a bunch of times, and that can cause some problems, although I think we've cleaned a lot of that up. Now,
would that duplicate the entries?
I don't think it will on the confirm any longer. On the apply filter, it might just start the query over. So if I just keep clicking it, it's just going to, I need to query it. People don't wait.
Do you know if they plan to address that with grayed out buttons or anything?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, spinny thing, something would, or
right,
like a sand thing, would really be nice.
It would.
Yeah. So something. Minor.
I'll let someone else write up that request for me. Good enough. Now you have some additional filters. So we just did the apply filter at the top, and that looked for the corp, work period, pay frequency. But say I just want to enter hours for a specific client. Or a certain check handling flag, or a certain job order, that's where you can go in and run these additional filters. Okay, so for instance, I've got company. So why don't we just put in a company in there? I think mine is like GPB, so just type GPB and hit tab out. And it should run a query and then look for that client, and then you can select it. And then hit apply filter. You notice you also have branch, either order branch or employee branch. So those are pretty heavily used on the company and the branch side to say, I just want to key for a certain client or a certain branch, and then maybe repeat that process for different companies and branches so they can just pound through them. So now we can see it is filtered just for that client. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I think that's probably it for here. So why don't we click the exit button? We don't need to confirm anything because we've already done that. We've already saved our time cards. We did a filter, but we didn't key anything additional. I don't know why you keep getting those. You can just close those. You might check and see if this is in your trusted sites or something like that.
Okay.
And then go on the left and click the batch summary, and that should refresh the page. So now we can see it should refresh automatically. I don't know why it's not doing on that your machine. Now I have the transaction count is set at 18. So with a batch, I can repeat the add single, add group as many times as I want to. I can come back later. I can do multiple people could come in here and add time cards. Now the only thing you can't do is have multiple people adding time cards to the same batch at the same time. What happens when you click add single or add group is it changes the batch status to in use. And someone, if they try and do the same thing, it'll say this batch is locked for editing. And you even see a workflow on the right side that says clear in use status. And we use that sometimes for, let's say my computer crashes or I just close out of the app without logging out. It might leave that batch locked in use. And that would allow me to come into the batch and clear it instead of having to go in the database and change the batch status, having to call support and have us do it. Now, let's go to the left side where we've got a section that says List Transactions. So here we can see all of the time cards, and they are in a status of entered. So the batch is available for entry. The time cards have been entered. So there's two different statuses, really. There's their status with reference to the batch, like entered, versus their approval status, which is unapproved, which we don't really see here because it has no bearing really on the proof and post process at this point. We also see the assignment, the company, the job, the candidate, and it's nice, those are hyperlinks. We could click into any of those if we wanted.
It seems, Adam, I noticed one of those, the name is missing on one of those transactions. How is that possible?
That's special. It could be that she doesn't have access to that candidate for some reason. And so it's not showing it here, so maybe she doesn't have branch access to that particular candidate.
That's kind of weird. But she was able to process their...
So she might have access to the assignment, but not to the candidate. So remember on the add group, it's looking at assignments, and so she had branch access to the assignment, but in here we see the name, and so maybe that's why it's grayed out. That would be my assumption. We have multiple pages, so you'll notice down in the lower right we have arrows where we can paginate. That's right, or we can use the arrows to go back and forth there. All right, let's go back to our summary on the left. We'll be coming back to this screen quite a bit as we move through the training. On the right side of your screen, you now have the Proof button. Now, you can proof within a batch, or you can proof from the main batch screen if you wanted to proof more than one batch. So we'll look at both methods. So what I want you to do is click Proof on the right side. And it just goes ahead and does it. There's no confirmation or anything because it's not going to hurt anything to proof a batch. So you can click that Close button, and that should cause the screen to refresh. We can see it's already been proofed. Now, it does offload that to the queue. So the queue is, I guess the word that we use is asynchronous. So what that means is if, let's say I had 500 time cards in here, and I click Proof, I don't have to sit there and wait and watch a progress bar that may or may not be giving me accurate information. I can just hit Proof and go on and do whatever I want and then come back later and move on with that. Okay. Now what happens is the batch status initially moves from an available for entry to a status that you didn't see because it moves so quickly to what we call selected for proofing. And what the first thing that the queue does is it goes and selects all of the time cards and marks them as selected for proofing so someone else can't come back and try and proof those time cards at the same time. And then it will do what it needs to do and ultimately mark them as proofed. So what if you do now is if you go to the left side and click on List Transactions again, we should see that those time cards have moved from an entered status to a proofed status. So it goes entered, selected for proofing, proofed. So if you were to come in here and watch this while it was proofing, it would be slowly moving all these selected for proofing, and then to proofed as it moved through each time card. Now on the left, you also have the available use of the diagnostics section. So let's click on that. So there's two ways you can look at diagnostics. One is inside the batch here, and also using the report. So we'll look in the report in a moment. So we've got a whole bunch of diagnostics for Joe. So he's got an assignment for the same work period in a different batch. He has different check handling flags on different time cards. He's set up for direct deposit, or the time card's not set for direct deposit, the employee is. And then, you know, I think we put in the holiday transaction on the time card that had 0 bill, so I get a whole bunch of diagnostics about that. We see one that's causing the AR balance to exceed the credit limit. And then you'll notice we have 7 different pages of diagnostics. So let's use the arrow and scroll through and look at a few of these. Now, in many cases, most of these are expected, right? Now, here's one that's interesting. So Aaron Black, he has a diagnostic that says the non-resident tax information is not set up for the work state. What in the world does that mean?
Means his W-2 information hasn't been set up.
What it means is he has a work location that is different than his resident information, and he doesn't have a non-resident record set up. So that's not necessarily a problem, but it's giving us a warning that really what that means, first of all, is that his work location geocode is different than his resident. Okay, assuming that's right, should he have a non-resident record set up? And it's giving us that kind of warning. So anytime you have someone living and working in another state, you'll get that unless you've set up what we call the non-resident. So why don't we take a look?
So you'll get that every time? You'll get that every time, every week?
Potentially, yes.
If you don't change it.
Right. So really what that means is we talked a little bit about non-resident last week, but I don't know that we went through the process of setting it up. Why don't we click on the, you'll notice there's an assignment ID there for Aaron. It's like 111946. Let's click on that. So we can see his work site below is listed as Colorado. And let's go click on Aaron at the top. And let's see where he lives. So he lives in Georgia. Now my assumption would be that Georgia and Colorado do not have any sort of what we would call tax reciprocity. A lot of times neighboring states would say, and we did mention this last time, well, you live in Virginia and work in Maryland. Those states might have an agreement that says, well, the Virginia people don't have to have Maryland taxes taken out and vice versa. But that's not automatic. That's what I want to show you now is how to enter that non-resident record. And this is important for those that are crossing states. So let's pretend for a minute that Aaron might end up working in Alabama. And let's say Georgia and Alabama have reciprocity. I don't know if they do off the top of my head. Vertex is gonna record taxable wages in both and withhold from both unless you go do the non-resident record. And it's not hard. So let's go to Aaron's employee financial section in the upper right and go to the payroll and tax record. And let's select that and hit View/Edit. And you've got a tax information section on the left. Click on that. I want to see what his residency is set to.
On tax information?
That's right. So he's really messed up. His address is Georgia, but he's set to a Pennsylvania resident tax code, and then he works in Colorado, so that's really fun. But let's pretend that he lives in Georgia, he's going to be working in Alabama, they have reciprocity. What would I do? You would go to the non-resident section, just a couple of lines down there on the left. And what you would do is go and add a non-resident record. So you would click Add at the bottom. So what we're going to say is that Aaron is a non-resident of Alabama that will be working in Alabama. So really what we need to do is on the left side, click the state of Alabama. And then we just click on the certificate submitted checkbox at the top and an effective date. Because technically, usually these states will have some sort of form they're supposed to fill out and give to their employer that says, I certify that I am not a resident of Alabama and I don't want Alabama withholding to come out, blah, blah, blah. And then I would hit confirm. That right side of the screen would just be if for this work location, there wasn't necessarily like, hey, it's reciprocity, it's not going to come out, but I'd have a different filing status in that state versus my resident because they have different tax set up or something like that. All right, hit confirm. So it's that simple. The non-resident record, where is the state they're working, where they don't want the tax to come out, where there is reciprocity, and you just go add that record. So again, that's not automatic. And in many cases, people have a tendency to get a little bit bent out of shape about that. Why I don't want the tax to come out, and then I have to go to this non-resident record. Typically, what Vertex will do is it understands the concept of, okay, I have tax withheld in one state, I get a credit for another, and it will take that into account when it's doing the tax withholding. So typically, they might pay the same or less tax, even if it's in both, and they just deal with that, when they do their tax return. So anyway. That's the non-resident records. That was a bit off in the weeds. Does anyone have any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Now, I'm fairly certain as well that if two states do not, let's say there's two neighboring states that do not have reciprocity, Vertex is aware of that, and I can go put a non-resident certificate in there all day, and it's still going to take it out because it knows. So, and you will occasionally get people that just say, well, it should only take where they're working, or it should only take where they're resident. Well, that's not true. That's just what you want it to do. So let's go on the right and hit close. See, another benefit of having me doing this training is you get my commentary on everything. So we really got kind of on a tangent there. We were looking at a proof. We noticed there was a diagnostic. But again, it's nice using the diagnostics in the batch. You get a hyperlink to the employee and a hyperlink to the assignment, so you can click in there and modify things should you need to. Now, how do we get back to that batch? I think we could use the back button in the upper left, or it may be in our work stack under the financials menu. So that took us to the assignment. Yep, so there it is, that batch that's called Back Office Training. Take us right there. Now, let's say for Joe, we noticed there's all these diagnostics in there about their zero pay or bill. Hey, maybe we want to look at that. So let's go to the list transactions on the left. And his time card is first in the list, so let's just select that. And then select it by clicking the radio button on the left. And clicking into those hyperlinks will take you into those records. And that's right. And then let's hit the View/Edit button at the bottom. So let's scroll down to the pay bill code grid. And let's say that, well, actually, this client has agreed to pay, or to have us do a pass-through on the holiday pay. So let's change those bill hours to 8 and put our markup on there. I don't know what it is. Let's see. It looks like it's 51 for regular, $51, so we can do the same thing there. And then let's hit confirm at the top. All right, so let's click on the left where it says batch summary now. What we can see is the batch status has gone from proofed back to available for entry. If we make a change, edit a time card, and save it, that will cause the batch to revert back because it wants us to reproof the batch to account for any changes that we've made. Now, if you go to list transactions, let's do that. What you'll see is I think all of the other time cards still show as proofed, and you'll notice just Joe's is entered. But it'll still ask us to reproof that batch, and then we might get a change in the diagnostics as well based on what we did for Joe. All right, let's actually go back to the batch area so I can show you how to proof multiple batches. So let's go up under financial processing and go back to batch. So we have a few batches in here, and we won't interfere with what Mike's doing. So what we'll do is put the checkbox next to your batch, Stacy, and then let's pick that one that came from the web. I don't know whose that is, but we're going to take it. So someone can have, let's say someone has a whole bunch of batches. You know, they're coming in from the web, or they've got 20 branches. I don't want to have to proof and go into each one and look at the diagnostics and all of that. I want to be able to just do it right from here and proof them all at once and get diagnostics for all the batches and run the proof register that we haven't looked at for all the batches. So go on the right now and you notice the same proof option that you did within the batch. All right, hit close. Now, where did those batches go? Anyone got any ideas?
Back to summary page, back to where we started.
Actually, if you recall, we had a search filter in here. And our search filter says only show batches that are available for entry. So let's change that. And I just clear it out. You don't have to pick one. It's not required. Because we're going to be moving these batches through various processes, we don't have to change our filter every time, right?
I think this is where I get stuck every time I try to do payroll. This is exactly where I get stuck.
You have to, and that search filter will stay that way. So I just hit a search filter and just leave it the way you want it, and then you don't have to mess with it. You don't have to keep changing it. Oh, I need to see proofed ones now. I need to see posted ones. It'll just show you regardless of what they are.
Okay.
Now let's sort actually, Stacy, by the input date to show us the most recent ones. There we go. So we can see Mike's is still selected. Carla's got one in use, but there's yours right there. Now what you can do is check the box next to that one and then go over to the reports menu on the right. And you can actually run the reports right from here. I don't have to go to the reporting area and generate a separate report. So why don't we look at the one that's about midway down in that list that says Time Card Proof Post Diagnostic Register. Yep, and we just want the proof format, and let's hit confirm. All right, so this is very similar. It's actually the exact same things that we saw in the diagnostics section for the batch. It just allows me to review. I could print this out and highlight it or do whatever I want to do. And it does have multiple pages. So let's go through and see if we get anything for the other batch that we proved. And I think actually we proofed this batch originally. I think since we already proofed it once, when we run it from here, it's going back and looking at the original proof process. So let me show you how to work around that. So let's close this report. And what we'll notice is there is a process. You notice there's a column that says proof process, and it just has an ID number in it over to the right. So it's let's highlight that. So just select it. So that ID number. So let's just select that process ID number 1167935.
Okay, I don't see where you're talking about.
Yep, that process, you just had your cursor over at 116.
There it is.
Yep, and let's just highlight that and then just Control-C on your keyboard.
Okay.
And let's go up to the reporting menu at the top. Go to Reports. And we do, if you scroll down a little bit on your left, you'll see an area that's called Batch Reports. So you can click where it says Time Card Batch Diagnostic Register, which is number 5. And it'll say Proof, Confirm. And I'll explain further why we're doing it this way in a minute if it wasn't clear. And then just paste that exactly and then hit Confirm here.
Now there's the other batch.
There's the other. So what happened is if I had never initially proofed that first batch, it would work fine right from that reports menu. But since I had proofed it already, I think when you do it from that reports menu, it just shows the first one. And I don't know if that's by design, but this is an easy way to work around it where you can explicitly type in what that process number is. Because you might proof a batch multiple times. So again, this prevents them from having to go into each batch and look at the diagnostics. They can just run it from here. Or excuse me, look at all of them in here on the report. All right, let's close that. And there's one other report I want to show you in that batch reports area. And it's the time card batch proof post register, which is number 3. And this is like the totals for the batch or batches that I proofed. So same thing, you can put that same process ID number in that box when it pops up. And again, I could run this from the reports menu inside the batch or from the batch summary area as well. So now we can see the totals by batch. And it gives you detail by time card. And then it also will show you totals by batch and by corporation. So people will use this. So they're putting in time cards, and they've got particularly a pay amount and a bill amount, and pay hours and bill hours. So when we get to payroll and billing, and we run a payroll process or billing process, we might validate this against our proof or post register to make sure, hey, am I seeing the same bill amount in my invoice register that I was on my proof or post register to make sure everything got billed? Or, you know, my gross pay on my check register, does it match what I saw in my proof or post register? So it gives them a way to make sure, you know, first of all here, am I seeing all the hours that I expected based on what my branches sent me or what I keyed in? And then second, I can use this as we move forward through payroll and billing processing to validate. Got 547 pay hours. I should see that when I move on, or 14,000 whatever pay amount. I should see that as we move forward as well. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Questions about proofing or the registers, the diagnostics, anything else before we move on? let's close this report then. And let's go back to the financial processing area. Let's go to batch. And what we're going to do now, if we think back to the chart, is we're ready to post. We've proofed, everything looks good, we've edited a time card, we've reproofed, we are ready to post. So, yep, and we can just do that one, which is fine. And let's hit the post button. Now when we hit post, we should get a pop-up message that says, hey, are you sure that you want to post? Because once I post the time card, it's locked into place. There's nothing I can do to get rid of this time card or change anything about the time card in the system. I could use an additional time card to offset something on there, and we'll talk about that in a later session when we get to adjustments. But it's locked in there, and that goes for a lot of things like, hey, remember this time card was not selected to be paid via direct deposit, or it was. You know, well, if I didn't have the direct deposit account info for Joe in, I post the time card, and then I put it in, tough luck. The time card's locked in with that flag not checked. And then they have to call support, and then support changes it for them. Or they call me, and I change it, and I bill them for it, whichever way you want to do it. Or they can just deal with it, right? So let's hit confirm to post our time card batch. Now, again, you could post multiple batches as well. Now we get our typical queue confirmation message that we get with any of our financial processing, and then we can hit close. So we can see that batch is already posted, and it's done. So what that means, what happens when the timesheets are posted? So let's first of all, let's click on the batch name to take us into the batch. And let's go to list transactions on the left. So what happens to the time cards is they move from a proofed status to a selected for posting to a posted. So the only reason you would ever see a time card in a selected for proofing or a selected for posting status is if they got stuck, like the queue service on the server went down, or there's some sort of data issue that's causing it to get hung up, or something like that. There's no system designed reason that a time card would ever be stuck in a selected status. It's either it's an error for some reason that's caused it to get hung up, or server problem. Looks like all of these posted successfully, therefore the batch status updated to posted as well. Typically, if a transaction gets hung up, it will cause the batch status to get hung up too. Now what we can do, there's another column of data that's populated here, and it looks like it just says sales, ... So why don't we expand that so we can see what it says. You see the column header at the top? So you've got to say 1029 in that column over on the right. Yeah, let's expand that so we can see what it says. So this is the sales posting date, right? So this is the same concept we had in Staff Suite and I think Tempware, which confuses everyone to no end, right? Purpose in the system. I think to start out on this discussion, I want us to go up to the administration area. And there's a section kind of in the middle that says Manage System Settings. And there's a field on here that says Time Card Week Ending Day. And it says Saturday. So here's the part where I'm either going to confuse everyone to no end or put them to sleep as I attempt to explain this. So we at a system level say, hey, typically our week ending day for our company that we use is Saturday. Okay. Now what we did is on our time cards we did Sunday week ending, which the system allowed us to do. the sales posting date is designed to, it's what we use to run our sales report. So one thing that really happens when we post a time card is we're recording the sale at that point. Okay, so I posted it, and then I can run my sales. The sales reports really don't care if they've actually been paid out or billed at this point. I posted the time card. It has a pay amount on it. It has a bill amount on it. And remember, it has accrued burden associated with it as well. So I could run a sales report right now for those time cards to show me bill less pay less accrued burden to get what we call a gross profit or gross margin number. So the sales posting date is what I use to run those. Now, a sales posting date is always going to be either the most recent work period that would make sense for our company, so last Saturday in this case, or the upcoming Saturday, depending on what I put in. So let's put it this way. 99% of the time, people are keying time cards in for the last week. Their sales posting date is going to match the work period ending date. It's really not that complicated most of the time. Okay, so I put time cards in. The work period was last Saturday. My sales posting date's last Saturday. That's when the sale occurred. Now, what if I had a time card that was late? So an employee turned in a time card that was actually for 2 weeks ago. Okay, so let's say that happens next week, or 2 weeks from now, and so it's November all of a sudden, and an employee turns in a time card for October, and I put it in the system legitimately with an October work period ending date, and then I post it. It's not going to put a sales date of October. October's done with, right? We would have to go back and rerun all of our sales reports. No, it's going to put the sales date. When did I recognize the sale as the most recent work period date? Stacy, are you following me so far?
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
Yes.
So an interesting case then is, let's go back to our batch. Let's go to financial processing, and let's see if that batch is in our work stack up there. Let's go to the financials menu, and yep, there you go. Click on the batch name. Let's go to list transactions. So what we can see is the work period ending we put is 10/23, and then it put the sales date as 10/29. Anyone think they can tell me why?
To those of us who actually know the answer, eligible to answer.
What's that?
I said, are we eligible to answer?
Sure.
Because it picked the work week ending date closest to the current date, basically.
Yeah, and really, I think what it did, the way AdaptSuite works is, in the system we had our work period ending date set as Saturday, right? So that would have been 10/22. So if we had put our time cards with a work period ending date of 10/22, that's when it would have logged the sales posting date. But since we put the work period after the last kind of system-defined work period, which was Saturday, it goes to the next Saturday. So again, if our work period is if our work period on the time cards is the most recent work period or prior, so in this case 10/22 or prior, it's going to mark the sales posting date as 10/22. If it's any date beyond that, it's going to be 10/29. So the sales posting date is either the most recent work period ending date or the next upcoming one based on what we have set in system administration. So we can have this long-winded discussion about it, but it's either, in this case, 10/22 or 10/29. So since the work period we put was after 10/22,
it went to the next one.
It went to 10/29. If we had put any date 10/22 or prior, it would have been 10/22. The sale is always the most recent work period, Saturday, because that's how we set in administration, or the next Saturday. And again, the reason for that is it really is just late time cards and stuff like that, making sure that those don't get lost. You'd never want to run a sales report based on work period ending date or whatever, because what if you get an old time card? The sales posting date handles that. Are there any questions about that? I know it took me, when I first started here, a little bit to understand that, because I think Staff Suite uses the same terminology. I don't know if it's handled exactly the same way, but it took me a little bit to understand that. So any questions?
No, I'm glad you explained it, because I would have thought that was the invoice date.
Gotcha. So we haven't gotten to billing yet. Now, we have seen customers that will run sales reports by invoice date. If they want to customize them, they can. But when we talk about that, what if someone does monthly invoicing? Does that mean you can't recognize the sale until you run the billing at the end of the month? If you run it by sales posting date, you can recognize the sales as they happen. So, sales posting date, it's somewhat of a sophisticated feature. It makes sense if you understand it. It confuses our clients, quite a few of them. So if you feel confused right now, don't feel bad. We can talk about it again if we need to. We need to write up some sort of document. And I might be overcomplicating it because, again, really when you think about it, it's the most recent work period or the upcoming one. And that's it. It's one of those two dates. All right, so again, in the database, it's changed the status to posted. It's recorded a sales posting date, and it has logged accrued burden in the database as well. And remember, that burden is based on those rates that we have in administration. It just doesn't have any knowledge of someone's unemployment wage base at this point. Time cards have to be posted before I can run payroll or billing. Any questions before we move on here?
No.
Okay. Now, there's one other method of timesheet entry I want to show you. Click on any of those assignment numbers besides the one where we don't have access to the candidate. So just any of Josh's or Isaac's or Joe's. Click on the assignment number. Perfect. You can actually enter a time card directly from the assignment. So good use of this might be you get a late time card. Instead of having to go to the financials, financial processing, batch, create the batch, add single transaction, you can go right to the assignment and add a time card from the assignment. So we'll talk about what that does. So let's go to the Add New menu on the right and click Time Card. So for those of you that are familiar with Staff Suite, most of this stuff has been pretty ho-hum, but I don't know that Staff Suite has this, so this might be new to you. And this was in the system pre-back office, so we kind of commandeered this to use when we roll out the back office as well. So the only thing that you really have to be careful about with this is it puts the current date as the work period end date. So what's today? Thursday? Wednesday? Is this
Thursday.
A weekday? Okay, so it put 10/27 as the work period ending date. Well, that's not, no one has a Thursday, so you might need to go change the work period ending date. So you see where it says 10/27, you might just update that. You can use the calendar icon, or calendar does work even though the icon doesn't show up correctly. So you could put Saturday or Sunday or whatever it is. And let's do Saturday. Let's do the 22nd. And then you can put the hours in. So let's do, whatever, 40 hours or something like that. And again, you can use the total hours field, and it'll probably put it all to overtime. I think you scrolled down in that grid. That pay bill code grid.
Oh, yes, I did.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, it's for a different work period. So remember, we put his work period in as 10/23 on his other time card. So that's why it's not putting it all to overtime. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's hit confirm. So one thing you'll notice you did not have to do is you didn't have to create a batch. Did that automatically when we created the time card. So again, it's a quick way on the late time cards. I wouldn't want to do this across, like have to go into every assignment and add a time card, but it's actually quicker if you just got one to enter. Go to the assignment, add new, boom, you're done. And you can get to it very easily as well now. I want to show you, it's a good segue. On the left, you have a time cards section. And here we can see the different time cards, right? The one that was in the back office training batch, it looked like maybe someone else added one for this person. And then we can see the batch for the one of the ones that we just entered here. I don't know which one it was. But if you click on the batch number for either of those last two that are in your list, the last two, because you'll notice the period end is ascending.
Right.
So you can see that it does inherit ultimately the work period end date from the time card. So although it defaulted, it hadn't created the batch until I hit confirm on the time card, and then it writes it into the database that way. Does that make sense?
Say that again.
So remember when we hit add new time card from the assignment, it popped up and it had the work period of the current date. And we changed that to be 10/22, right?
Yes.
So what it did is it ultimately created the batch with the same work period end date as the time card. Because remember on the time card we changed it to be 10/22. So it changes it or writes it in once you hit confirm. So again, that's kind of a one-off thing that someone might do from the assignment. It's not like people are going to be going to assignments and adding time cards across the board, but it's a nice little feature to have for those late time cards. Go to the assignment, enter the time card. Go to the assignment, enter the time card for those late ones that come up. Now let's proof and post this time card. You can just do that right from within here.
And then post.
That's right, yep. Looks like maybe this was Amy's, so we've stolen Amy's time card. Or someone was using her branch. All right, so let's hit close. Now let's go to list transactions on the left. So this validates my sales posting theory. See, I'm not just making stuff up. The sales posting date of 10/22 matches the week ending date. So again, last time since we'd said 10/23, then it advanced to the next Saturday for the sales posting date. Otherwise, it's most recent Saturday or upcoming Saturday. All right, so that is time card proofing and posting, start to finish. Again, there's a couple of other entry methods that people use quite a bit, but we're kind of focusing on the basics right now. The import and web portal time are used pretty heavily by some of our clients. But the bottom line is, no matter how they get them into the system, they have to be proofed and posted using the methods that we've seen here. Any questions before we move on?
Nope.
Okay. Now you'll notice that there are two separate columns in the time card in that list transactions that says payroll status and billing status. They're both unpaid and unbilled. The payroll and billing processes in AdaptSuite are unrelated to each other. So I can run payroll first, I can run billing first, I could run billing and never run payroll. The system does not care. They're separate processes, they use different things, they affect different things. So some people, if we have new clients that are, well, in my old system I had to run payroll and then I could run billing. But you don't have to do that anymore. So again, they're independent of each other. And what I'd like to do, I think I've got another kind of fun chart I can pull up that I can show you guys. Let me pull it up. And I'll flip back to me. All right, so make me the presenter. Zoom in a little bit. find that typically people do process payroll first, so that's what we'll start with because usually they're under some sort of deadline to get their payroll out, but that's not always the case. Two different payroll processes. One to produce regular checks that I'm going to print versus payroll that's going to process, again, the direct deposit advices and then ultimately to get that information to the bank. It's very similar. So most everyone does both. You might have some that are 100% one or the other, but usually they'll have, even if they're 99% direct deposit, they might have a few stragglers. We do have some clients that still 100% paper check for some unknown reason. Now, I can process checks or direct deposit. We'll talk about the optional processing criteria. That gives you the ability to narrow down what you're processing instead of just everything that's available. And then you can, we have in here print payroll checks, print direct deposit advices. It's really reviewing reports, looking at the totals, and either, I might look at the checks or the direct deposit advices, run reports, do what I need to do. Do I notice a problem? Did I put the wrong check date? Did I not process what I was looking for? I was missing somebody. We have what we call reset payroll. So when I process payroll in the database, that creates all of the check and withholding and deduction information, puts it in the employee's check history, updates the status of the time cards, so on and so forth. With a reset process, it undoes all of that. It wipes it all out and sets the time cards back the way they were. I can make changes and then I can reprocess. I can do that as many times as I want to. Same thing on the direct deposit. That'll make more sense when we get to it. Bottom line is when I'm done, we have a process that we call update payroll, and that really locks those checks and advices into place, meaning it's almost like posting time cards. I can no longer reset. So if there's something not right about that check or advice, I need to void it. And then finally, on the direct deposit side, we have the ability to then create the transmission file that we can send to the bank. And there is a reset process there as well. If something wasn't right in your advices, you could reset the file. And we'll look at all these in more detail. All right, so Stacy, let me flip it back to you. And we'll actually process some of this. So let's go to the financials menu and financial processing again. And can you guess where we're going? Payroll. So let's click on the payroll area. And this really confuses people. I don't know why it does. It just does. Payroll process search results. Again, this is much like the batch search results. It's showing me previous existing payroll processes that have been run. For some reason, people come in here to some degree, and I see it quite a bit, and expect to see their time card batches in this area. No, your time cards or batches are in the batch area. I've proofed and posted those. What I'm coming here to do is initiate a payroll process. I need to process those time cards. So I won't see them here because they're not a payroll process, they're time cards. This is showing me payroll processes that have been run. So what we need to do is go to one of those menus on the right side. So let's start with just regular checks. So let's go to the payroll check menu in the black menu bar, and let's say process. So the first thing it's asking us is the training corporation and then the bank account. Remember, we entered the bank account on your corporation. Someone could have multiple bank accounts. Why don't we change that bank account? Let's see what else we have in there. Diana didn't deactivate her bank account when she left. So let's click on payroll. And then again, it's going to pre-populate the check number based on what it saved in the bank account record as the most recent one. And then obviously the check date. So the check date just populates as the current date. I almost wish we didn't populate anything in there and forced people to pick it because they might forget and leave it at the current date. Well, payday is really Friday exactly, and they're processing on Tuesday. Inevitably, they'll forget and leave it, and they'll process it with a Tuesday date, and they have to reset, et cetera, et cetera. No one's ever processing the day. Well, I shouldn't say never, but it's unusual. So what would happen, I don't want you to click confirm, but if you just click confirm right now, what that would do is go out and find any time cards for the training that were posted and unpaid. So remember, if we think back in our mind to that list transactions area and the time card status, which was posted, payroll status, in our case, the batch we were working with, was unpaid. If they had already been paid, pay them again. So it just go out and find any time cards that anyone had entered. Now what we've seen is other people have been in here doing stuff, so why don't we just go and pick our specific batch that we've been working with to process. And that's where we can use the optional processing criteria. And what you'll notice is batch name is second on the list. This is actually the branch, which is fine. A lot of people use this. I just want to process checks for a certain branch and then print those out and move to the next. Completely fine. But in our case, let's click on the batch name. And this runs a query, so available batches, and it's only going to show us batches that have unpaid time cards for the corporation that are set to be paid via regular check. Remember, it's not going to process time cards that are flagged for direct deposit. It's only going to process the ones that are set for regular check. So then you'll notice there's a plus button at the bottom of that grid that will move it over. So you could pick more than one batch and bring it over to that right side. And then hit confirm. We had some other ones we were working with, but I don't remember what they were called, so we'll just use,
okay.
We'll
so
just do that
one.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So you have other optional processing criteria. Probably the most used would be branch and batch and maybe the check handling. You know, hey, I just want to process the ones that need to get mailed out or whatever. So does that make sense, using the optional processing criteria versus just processing everything?
Yes.
Okay. And you see a mix. A lot of clients use the optional, but if they have a ton of time card batches, you know, like they're coming in from the web or something, they might instead use branch or nothing at all and just process everything. All right, let's hit confirm. And a queue confirmation window do is just highlight the process ID that pops up and copy it to put it in your clipboard. And then hit the close button. Now what we should see is that you have a payroll check process there in that grid now. And it's already completed. And it shows that the first check number was 100144, it was the check date, whatever, it's completed. And there's a column that says reset. It shows us that it has not been reset. If it had, it would put the process ID of the reset in there. We'll talk more about that. The process ID number to take us into the process itself. So in the summary, it shows us the 3 people that it selected time cards for. So we had like 18 time cards in there. It looks like most of them were set to be paid via direct deposit. Then on the left, we have a diagnostics section, just like we do on the time card. You typically won't get many diagnostics in the payroll side. So what this is telling us is that, hey, someone's already run government reporting for this corporation for one of these dates, so you might need to rerun it. That's all it's saying. So if you know, let's say I'm putting it in for a check date of October or September, and someone's already run the quarter, hey, you might have to run it again, or this isn't going to be included in your government reporting. We'll talk more about government reporting later. But a lot of times this area is blank, the diagnostics. If a time card deselects, you might get a diagnostic. If something fails, you might get a diagnostic. But it's not like the time card where you get all that stuff in there, all those different warning messages. All right, let's go on the right and hit the close button to get out of this process. So this is where someone might start performing review. And the first thing we could do is look at our check report. So you can go in the payroll check menu and say print payroll checks. It doesn't literally print them to your printer. It spits them out in a PDF for you. And I think you put that process ID in your clipboard, so we should be able to paste it. Or if you didn't, you can just obviously see it on the screen right behind you, and you could key it in. All right, so this is what the check stub looks like. Across the top, you have the different pay bill codes from the time cards. We call those time card transactions. And then you have any withholdings. So in this case, we had the typical federal withholding amounts and then state. And then we actually had a city tax for Denver based on how someone's work location was coded. If we had any deductions for this employee, there will be a deductions grid. Kind of see where that white space is to the right of the withholdings? That's where we would see any deductions, and they would be listed by code and amount. And then if you scroll to the bottom of this page, you would see the check portion itself. So the check report out of the box is designed to go on pre-printed check stock. So that means someone would have a piece of paper that has their logo and the MICR and coding, and we are just overlaying on top of that. But keep in mind, we can design custom check reports for any customer, and we can put logos and the MICR and really everything. Someone can have blank stock that we can print the entirety of the check onto. And that looks like what we call an overflow check. So why don't you scroll back up to the top for me? So Tom has a whole bunch of junk. So the first thing we'll notice, let's go down to the next page. Let's go to page 2. So I think one is we had a bunch of different assignments for Tom, right? So out of the box, the payroll process, if someone has more than 4 time card transactions, so he's got the 4 line items for regular there, that'll spill over into the next page. And since we're talking about payroll checks here, that means it'll give it a different check number and what we call an overflow. So if you go to the next page, you'll see it has more earnings codes, and that's what we call an overflow check. So it'll say like void at the bottom because he might get 2 printouts, but only one is the check that he can actually cash, whereas the other just shows him the rest of the stub. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Got it. Now, and I think it was in the 3.5 release, we have the ability to change the number of earnings records. So I think, again, out of the box, it's like 4. You can change it to be up to 8, but you might have to accommodate for that in the check report so that it has room to expand. So that would prevent a lot of those different overflow codes that we got. Now, we also, with Tom, had a whole bunch of crazy withholdings. Like, he probably had all these different work locations, so it was holding Pennsylvania tax and Georgia tax and all kinds of stuff. So if you go back up to his first, there you go. So yeah, he had Connecticut, Georgia, and Pennsylvania tax, and then Pennsylvania city tax as well. But there you can see the deductions grid on the right. So he had a 401k and a garnishment, and we can see those as well. Any questions about the check report that we see here?
No.
Okay. Why don't we close this then? And let's now process our direct deposit payroll. So it works really the same way. We've got a corporation, a bank account, we have an advice date, so let's set that forward to be tomorrow as well, just like the check date. There is a separate range in the database, and I don't know if it's necessarily a separate range, but you notice how it says advice number 6033? It will append DD underscore to the front of that. So if you have check number 1000, you can have direct 1000 DD under a conflict check numbers. So let's do our same batch. If you scroll to the bottom, it should be the last one. I think it just displays in kind of or near the bottom. There's the BO training one, yeah. It's probably just sorting by reference number. Confirm. All right, let's hit confirm here and process our direct deposit payroll. All right, it's pending, and the reason we see that is because it looks like Mike is processing payroll, and we have to wait on Mike's process to finish before it's going to start. So if we click on the left there, you can refresh the page. So where it says payroll process search results, that will refresh. Looks like Mike's is still chugging along there. And I wonder, we both picked the same check number, starting check number, so it ultimately may be that yours will fail once his finishes. Because you're going to try and use an advice number that's the same that Mike used in starting his.
Okay.
And what it will do is fail, and then we can just process again. So let's go ahead and refresh and see if that's going to finish for us. Mike's is still churning along. There it goes. It's
they
completed.
both completed.
Oh, they both completed. Now, that'll be interesting if we end up with the same check number in there. Now let's click on yours, Stacy, your process ID. No process items. Now let's click on the left where it says diagnostics. We got no diagnostics. So what happened? My guess is instead of failing it, it just didn't do anything. It said, I can't use that. Now it really should have given us a diagnostic in that case.
Would it deselect, Adam?
Now, the only thing I can think of, Mike, is that did you pick the same batch that you were processing, or did you process for everything?
I selected my batch.
Okay, just yours. You didn't select the one that we were working with?
No, I did
okay.
not.
So let's hit close on the. If it deselected, we would get a message to that effect.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
So let's just go and process it again. In the bottom line, whether it gave us a diagnostic or not, it wasn't going to try and process with the same check number, I guess. So we don't need to select that for any reason. Another direct deposit. Process. Because the other reason it would have not selected anything is if Mike had processed everything in that batch. Well, then when it went to process, it would have found, well, hey, there's nothing in this batch.
It's not there anymore.
I think someone, maybe Mike or somebody, processed everything. So that actually makes me feel a little bit better.
Okay,
so,
Adam?
Yep.
I actually, on that list, I only selected my batch.
Did you use the plus button to bring it across to the current batches side?
No, I did not.
So that's okay. This gives us a good opportunity to look at the reset workflow. So let's close out of that. Let's hit cancel. And let's hit cancel again. So this actually, everything worked just like it should have. So Mike, and that's a common thing that happens to new users, he selected the batch and the batch name but didn't hit the plus button to bring it across.
Like just put it to the right side.
Exactly. And then when you confirmed there, you would see it in the optional processing. So what happened then, the reason Stacy's process didn't fail is because there was nothing to select anyway.
Exactly.
Because it had already been processed.
Everything in that batch, exactly. Everything in that batch had already been processed.
Right. So you have to, if you're going to select a certain batch, you got to move it over.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
So what we can do,
everything's going to be processed.
That's right. And you can always tell, and I'll show you another thing that can help with that. But this is a good opportunity for us to use the reset.
Reset.
Hey, we made a mistake. I meant to process one particular batch. I accidentally processed everything. What do I do?
I did this on purpose, Adam.
Exactly. You're helping me segue. So Stacy, now Mike, don't do it. Let's let Stacy do it. I want you to check the box next to that process. Actually, the one that Mike did. There you go. Because yours didn't have anything in it.
Right.
And go over to direct deposit on the right, and let's say reset direct deposit.
And that's just going to take away what he did.
Yeah, it's going to wipe out everything in the database regarding the checks, withholdings, deductions, and set the time cards back to being unpaid. Now, when you reset, it comes up with that screen, and it allows you to do like a partial reset. So while he processed starting with check number 6033, if I only wanted to reset from a certain point forward, which really makes more sense on the payroll check side. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you leave advice number blank, it's just going to reset everything, which is what we want to do here. I don't have to type in the starting, and I think it says that up there somewhere. Yeah, if an advice number is not defined, the system will reset all payroll advices within the process. And then we'll hit close. So we can see that it now puts a separate line item for the reset process. We can see that's completed. And then we can see that there's a reset column that's showing that it reset a specific process. Now, where did Mike's process go? Again, that has to do with our search filter. So if you click on that search filter up there, there's a flag that says something like include fully reset processes, and it's not currently checked. So let's check that box. And there we go. So we can see Mike, and we can see the column reset says full reset. So that column serves two purposes. If it's a payroll process, it will show if it had been, it'll be null if it hasn't been reset, and then it'll show full or partial, I think. If it's a reset process, it's going to show which payroll process did I reset in that column. And a lot of that's actually new with, I think, 3.5. We put some of that logic in there to show that. So what that means now, Stacy, is that unwound everything that we did, and we can now process again. So let's go back and go to direct deposit and initiate a new payroll process. Again, we don't need to do anything with any of those processes in the grid. And checking them is not going to hurt anything. But let's go to the batch name selector.
And now they're all back.
They're all back. Because again, when Mike paid him, what it did is it set the time card status to be paid. And that query is only going to show me unpaid time cards. So see how we move it across to the right, hit confirm. And then what we'll also see on the optional processing criteria screen, it should show the batch name. Now there's a defect out there right now where if you've been processing a while and using that a lot, it doesn't show up here in the criteria, but it does still work. Even though it doesn't show up here, it will still work. And you'll see that if you've been in here doing it a bunch of times. So let's hit confirm. So it now shows in process, and again, if we wanted to, we could go on the left and just click to refresh the screen. Completed.
It's completed. Got it.
Now, very similar to what we did, you can print the direct deposit advice, which is just a stub, very similar to the payroll check that shows withholding information, deduction, what the net distribution. It'll show the distribution to the different accounts, as opposed to having a stub where you would, print it. Now, what I would like us to do is go under your financials menu at the top, and let's go to that batch BO training that's in your history or your work stack there. And let's go to list transactions on the left. It's already there. So now what we can see is that payroll status is paid, right? It went from unpaid to paid, which means it won't be selected by a future payroll process because it's already paid. But it's not yet updated, which means I can do the reset, right? I can reset as long as it's paid, I can still reset it. Why don't we click on any of those candidates? So Joe or Josh or somebody or Aaron. And you can also now see the check in the employee financial area in the upper right, their check history. So there's the check date of 10/28. We can see the type was a regular check. And we can see the status is processed. It has been processed but not yet updated. See, all the other ones show as updated. If you want to view the check details, you can do that from here. So you can select the little radio button to the left of the check date, say View. You got to get a nice pop-up of all the check information, including the earnings records, holding and deduction records, and then the associated time cards at the bottom. And you can actually hyperlink into those, which is nice.
Adam.
Yep.
Let's say you update this direct deposit or whatever, and then you create the transmission file.
Yep.
Is it going to change that status from updated to DDX, or
it will
does not do that? It will.
It will. It does the same thing. Yep.
It's the same thing.
It is. Now in this case, it's a regular check, so it'll just finish it updated. It won't go to direct deposit extracted.
Exactly.
Well, let's walk through that. So let's close this check history window. And let's go back to the payroll area.
Of the candidate?
Nope, financial processing.
Okay.
So that took us to the batch. So let's actually go to the payroll area where we were doing the processing. There we go. So at this point, we are ready to update. So again, update is a little bit of a strange word for this, but it means we're going to lock these in. We don't want them to be reset. So there's a couple of different points that it might update. Regular checks always recommend that people print before they update. Okay, so what if they're printing 30 checks and it's churning along and it gets to check 28 and then the printer jams and they have pre-printed check stock? Okay, well at that point they could reset and just do a partial reset and start processing from where it jammed, because we want our check numbers in the database to match the check numbers on the checks. So they print, make sure everything comes out all right, and then they would update. Direct deposit, you have to update before you can transmit to the bank, right? I'm trying to think, really before we do that, people might run some reports, like check register, withholding register, make sure things line up. So why don't we look at that real quick? So let's go up to the reporting menu. And let's go to reporting and analytics. And this is the new interface. It's all very disorienting. So let's go, on the left we have those system reports. And Stacey, I don't know how much you've played around in here. So the system stuff is all going to be at the top. Yep, so expand that. And then we've got a payroll report, or payroll folder, I'm sorry. And one that I really like is that first subfolder that says Dashboard Payroll Summary by, I think it's by check date or something. And let's execute that first one. So just click on that, and let's see if you can right-click on it. I haven't been around in this interface. Did you try and right-click and say Run Report?
No parameters needed. Doesn't look like it.
It's going to come up and ask us.
Oh, okay.
So here it defaults in, Stacy, your default corporation and check dates for the current month. So why don't we change that check date range to just be today? Yeah, in the calendar, yeah, exactly. Or excuse me, not today, the 28th, because that's what we processed. Yep. The corp is good, and let's hit OK. So this is really a great report because it gives us the earnings. So if we wanted to balance the earnings by code to our proof or post register, we could do that. And then it shows us the withholdings and then our regular check. Now, this makes me realize that one thing that we probably didn't do, remember when we reprocessed direct deposit? It may be that we didn't change the advice date to the 28th. We left it as the current date, the 27th, because I don't see any direct deposit info in here, right?
I don't think we changed it. I think we left it.
So let's run that again. So just go on your left and left right click on it and say Run Report. And we can just run it for the 27th through the 28th.
Okay.
Now again, that's why it's always good to run reports, because they might catch that and they could go and reset before they update and fix the advice date. Otherwise, they have to call Mike and make him fix all of them in the database. So now we can see more earnings codes. We see the breakout of check and direct deposit. And then we can see withholdings and deductions, right? So someone might look through the payroll withholdings and, hey, are these states that I recognize that we're set up to do business in, or am I seeing anything crazy in here? And then, you know, withholdings, deductions. They can see a lot of this on one screen instead of having to necessarily go run a withholding register, a deduction register. So this is a pretty useful report. Now another one that someone might run on the left in that folder listing is the payroll check register. So it's a few folders there below the dashboard folder. Do you see that? It's on the left in the folder listing. It's a new report we're talking about. So
okay.
Go down. So keep going. There's subfolders and one that says payroll check register. Expand that. Yep. And then run that one. The same right click and run the check register. Now for that one, we got a few more options because we could export it if we wanted to. All right, so let's talk about this. Yeah, let's do your dates. That's perfect. Now we have some optional kind of parameters down here. So right now the employee ID is set to greater than 0 and the process ID is set to greater than 0. So what that means is it's going to return any checks or advices for that check date. Now if we only wanted to run it for a process ID, see where it says greater than? You could click that and change it to equal to and then put in your process ID number. Or if I only wanted to run it for a specific employee, I could say equal to and put in the employee ID. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Wow.
So otherwise, keep it to greater than on both of those so that it will just get everyone back. All right, so let's run it. And this is just kind of our parameters page, and then you can use the arrows in the upper right to go to the next page where we'll actually see the data. So gross, withholdings, deductions. If you want to get more real estate, like if you want to collapse the folder listing on the left, see there's like 3 little dots like kind of just to
right
the left.
here.
Right there.
Yeah, you can collapse those, or if you expand those again, you can collapse the the folder listing. There you go. Now what you did is you were messing with those
The filters.
Yeah, so they're on demand, which is pretty slick. So if I run it and then I say, hey, I just want to see direct deposit, you can go on the left and then it'll on demand. I don't have to re-execute the report to say, only show me direct deposit.
Wow, that's cool. That's slick. I like that.
It's pretty slick. So those are called HTML filters. There's quite a bit of documentation, I think videos we've done about that. Now the other thing you can do in here is if I want to see the details of a check, so like if you go to that second page and you notice that check number is a column, like DD6034, if you click on that, that actually drills into a subreport or linked report that will show the details of that particular check.
Wow.
So the check register kind of gives someone at a high level to say, okay, here's my gross. Does that match my proofing or posting register? Here's my total withholdings, deductions, my net check amount, right?
But does anybody really look at those reports?
No, they just hit update and print.
I was talking about proof reports too.
Proof reports, yeah. I think Hamilton Riker looks at them, and that's it. They're the only people. But even on the direct deposit side, we might write down our net check amount and then use that to validate against direct deposit transmission file. So we've reached our time limit. So what we're going to do at the next session is we're going to wrap up payroll. We might look at a couple more reports in here. We'll talk about updating payroll, creating a transmission file, really talk about what does that mean, what does it do, and then how does an end user deal with that? Because that's always kind of, from our software, to me, it's always interesting. How does someone take that file and actually pay people with it? So we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into the billing process. We'll talk about billing profiles, how they impact the billing process, produce invoicing. We might look at direct hire. That'll probably take us through the session. So I think that is on Monday? I think I have it on Monday. Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern is when I have it. So I'll send out a GoToMeeting for that. Today's recording and these diagrams that we're using, I'll put up on that SharePoint site. I sent that email out to everyone. Those will be up there by the end of today. And then I will talk to you guys next time.
Great. Thanks, Adam.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adam.